Hello, and welcome to Inside Cancer Careers, a podcast from the National Cancer Institute. I'm your host, Oliver Bogler. I work at the NCI in the Center for Cancer Training. On Inside Cancer Careers, we explore all the different ways that people join the fight against disease and hear their stories. Today, we're talking to Dr. Kenny Gibbs from NIGMS, who has studied the biomedical career and developed and managed a series of key programs to support early career scientists from diverse backgrounds and shares his perspective on where we are today. After the break, we turn our attention to the NIH Post-Bac program and learn how participating in research at NCI for a year or two after your bachelor's can be a great experience and stepping stone. We have two guests, an alum and a current participant. Stick around to the end to hear how you can take your turn and benefit from the suggestions and recommendations made by our guests. It's a pleasure to welcome Dr. Kenny Gibbs to the podcast today. Welcome.
Thank you, Oliver. Great to be here.
Dr. Gibbs is the chief of the undergraduate and pre-doctoral cross-disciplinary training branch at the National Institute of General Medical Sciences here at NIH. He also serves as a program director for a portfolio of awards in the area of stem cell biology within the Division of Genetics and Molecular and Cellular and Developmental Biology. Dr. Gibbs, you've been engaged in programs to enhance diversity in the biomedical workforce for some time, and I wonder if we could start with what your assessment is of where we are with this important work in 2023.
Yeah, thank you for the question, Oliver. It got poetic. It was the best of times, but it was the worst of times. I don't know if it's necessarily the worst of times, but I think, I'm dispositionally optimistic. And so I see clear progress on a number of fronts. And so some of this is work I've done and published, but you can look at, for example, where we were as it relates to better engaging the entire population, including those from underrepresented groups, 3 or 4 decades ago to now. And there's a clear increase at all levels. Now, there's still also clear gaps between sort of the available talent pool and the talent pool of people who get biomedically relevant bachelor's degrees or research-focused higher degrees. And so in that respect, there is progress. We also haven't fully actualized our desire to, or really the imperative to make sure we have all available minds on the playing field, right? Because that's how we identify and then go about solving complex biomedical problems. I just say through time, there are various currents. And so there are different currents at various levels of government, which I won't elaborate on, where there are both efforts to advance these issues rapidly and then efforts to focus on a vocabulary and other things like that. And so my main work is focusing on continuing the work of ensuring we enable opportunities for promising trainees from all backgrounds, all meaning all, to participate in the biomedical research workforce. And then one thing I'll note is that a number of positive NIH-wide initiatives, and one that I've been involved in very recently is the Mosaic program to promote faculty diversity, which many ICs participate in. And so we've been able to, through that mechanism, really encourage a broader and more representative pool of PhD level scientists and postdocs to come into the K99 pool, and the many other going on to great jobs in their own right. So I'm dispositionally an optimist. I think this line of work requires you to continue to look on the positive while dealing with some of the challenges, but that's where I'd say where we are right now. We've made a lot of progress. There's still much work to do, but we'll make it.
So you mentioned the Mosaic, and you also mentioned that it's a K99. So maybe just for our audience who may not be familiar with that mechanism, what is the K99 specifically, and what is the Mosaic version of that program that you've built?
Thank you so much. I've worked with colleagues at NIGMS and across NIH on this effort. So Mosaic stands for Maximizing Opportunities for Scientific and Academic Independent Careers. And so my job, as you mentioned, is chief of the undergrad and predoctoral cross-disciplinary training branch. So we lay the groundwork for developing future scientists, innovators, right? And so we do a lot of work at the undergraduate level, the post-bac level, master's, and PhD level to say, let's make sure we're creating an environment where we can enhance institutions to support trainees from all backgrounds, recognizing there might be some differences and approach that might need to be taken based on individual experience. And so we've done a lot of great work there. But what we realize, and I'm a product of some of these programs, is that once you get to the postdoc level, a lot of the infrastructure to expand opportunity and broaden participation wasn't as structured. So Mosaic uses a mechanism that NIH has for a long time, I guess for about 15 years now, called the K99 R00. And that says, hey, you're a postdoc, you need maybe 2 more years of training before you're ready for independence. And so we'll give you an award for those final 2 years, followed by a 3-year award that you could start your independent research career in, the R00. NIH had that award for a long time, but when you looked at who even applied to the parent K-99, it was fewer than 7% from, historically underrepresented racial and ethnic backgrounds like Black or African American, Hispanic or Latin, American Indian, Alaska Native. And about just a third were women across any racial ethnic group. When you consider that women are more than 50% of postdoc, we're seeing there were gaps in even who was applying. And so when you have gaps in who applies, you have gaps in who gets awarded.
Of course.
And so what we said here is, hey, let's create a new mechanism that rewards your science and that rewards efforts to enable broader participation at your institution. So what we know is that many scientists, especially those from underrepresented groups, are often doing additional academic service work, even when they're grad students and postdocs, to create a better opportunity. We also know those efforts aren't always appropriately recognized in scientific review mechanisms. And, it takes time and everybody has a certain amount of time. And so that might actually ding your productivity a little bit. But, in time, if you can sort of say, let's support both of these efforts and recognize both of these efforts, you allow people to persist within the enterprise. So what this is, K-99 award that recognizes science as well as contributions to enhancing broader participation. And then we also pair them, the individual awardees, in cohorts with scientific society partners to provide additional mentoring, networking, professional development. Because what I like to say is that everybody needs the same things. We all need mentors. We all need networks. We all need strong peer groups. Different people are able to get that in the environment by and large. And individuals from certain backgrounds, especially those that are underrepresented, often don't get those by the way the environment is structured. So we're really just creating a parallel structure to support scientists from all backgrounds, including those underrepresented, and progressing into independence.
What you just said there is a recognition that I think is relatively recent, right? I mean, historically, perhaps NIH has supported the science and the scientific endeavors of people on early career mechanisms, but now we are recognizing that they need more than that. They need support, they need connections, they need some soft skills, all the things that you mentioned.
Yeah, and networks, peer groups, I think broadly, right, when you think about it, for everybody, right, the postdoc is sort of the first educational training stage where you kind of go in as an independent person. Right, because K through 12, undergrad, grad school, you enter as a cohort. Postdoc, you enter as a singleton, similarly with a faculty career, but you don't stop needing peer groups and support and mentoring and networking. And so, yeah, it's really just saying, well, let's just use what we know and use it to continue to support folks that we supported earlier. A number of them have been previously supported by, F31s, including the diversity version, diversity supplements. Some have been supported by, the sort of mainline T32 training programs. R25s, which is the alphabet soup of mechanisms, if you're not familiar. But what we're saying is that people that we've supported earlier are finding an additional on-ramp, and we've been able to attract a number of people who've not previously had any level of NIH support. And so I think it's great. And we see the pool of people who was applying, more than 3/4 of them have been women. About that same number have been from historically underrepresented racial and ethnic groups. And so then, of course, when you have a more diverse pool, we have a much more diverse set of awardees. And so it's been a delight to be able to work on that with my colleagues at NIGMS, as well as many colleagues across NIH.
So, of course, you have many other programs. You mentioned already, I think in passing, that you focus a lot on the phases that come before undergraduate and so on. So can you tell us a little bit about the programs that you lead there for NIGMS?
Yeah, I get to work with a great team of program officers. And so there's a lot of programs, but mainly they're at the undergrad, post-bac, master's, and then PhD level. At the undergrad level, we start at the community college level, a program called Bridges to the Baccalaureate. And so that supports partnerships between community colleges and four-year institutions, again, allowing those who are starting at the community college level to then be in a structured program to allow them to transition to a four-year institute and hopefully graduate with their STEM degree. Mark and URISE are sister programs. They're at different institution types based on the amount of NIH funding they have, but really that takes sophomores, juniors, and seniors who have a clear interest in getting a research-focused higher degree, like an MD, PhD, or PhD. And again, provides a nice structured training program and environment, thinking about peer group, how do they help develop their identity, self-efficacy, provide opportunities for research both at their institution and at external institutions. And again, those programs are great, and they, provide kind of a starting ground for the next generation of scientists. Then we move to the post-bac level. And so what we have there are candidates who finish their undergrad degree, they're interested in their PhD, and they either sometimes, haven't yet had the level of research experience that they would want to be competitive. And so they get a year, sometimes two, but a year of structured activities where they spend most of the time in their lab. And then again, these networking cohort activities. And then they move on. I think it's the last analysis was like 75% of them move on to get a PhD, which is great. We also have another bridge program at the master's level. And so some people use the postdoc route, some people use the master's route to get the additional skills that they want as they prepare themselves for the PhD. So again, that's a partnership between a master's degree granting institution and an institution that offers biomedical PhDs. And then finally, at the PhD level, so NIGMS is well known for our basic biomedical T32 programs. And so those provide training within the discipline, like genetics, chemistry, and biology interface, molecular medicine, biostatistics, things like that. What these programs are, IMSD and GRISE, are cross-disciplinary. So what they're really aiming to do is to provide to strengthen the research training environment and to really enable broader participation. And so thinking about, are there people within these disciplines for whatever reason who might be more likely to have challenges in acclimating and feeling that they fully belong in the environment? And then how do we create some additional wraparound activities and structures so they have what we know that everybody needs, a peer group, a set of strong mentors and things like that. So I feel really fortunate to be able to, do the work that I do and work with the people that I work with, because I think it's just really important. And, we can see alumni from these programs doing all sorts of great things. A number of them have gotten NIH research project grants, R1s, R35s, whichever alphabet you want to use. I've gotten other prestigious awards from foundations, and even a number of them have gone on to be Howard Hughes investigators and things like that. And so these programs have been going for a long time. So some of these are older than me, at least in some versions of them. There was an early version of the MARC program. And so I feel privileged to be able to steward this legacy. And the last point I'll mention is that I actually first was an NIH funded person through the MARC program. And so an early version of the MARC funded me a few decades ago when I was an undergrad at the University of Maryland, Baltimore County. And so it's just, it's kind of wild to go from being supported by the program to then overseeing that program and a number of other ones. But I feel privileged and blessed to be able to do what I'm doing.
That's certainly an interesting trajectory, yeah. So beyond your work at NIGMS, thanks for sharing that with us. You also work with the NIH Common Fund and have helped develop programs there. Before we go into the programs, can you tell us a little bit about what the Common Fund is?
Oh, that's a great question. The Common Fund is really, as I think about it, is funds used by the NIH director to address critical scientific and biomedical problems or opportunities, if you will, that are beyond the span of one or just a few institutes. And so all institutes and centers at NIH pay into the fund. And then there's an elaborate process, which I'm not fully a part of or aware of how it happens. But then, a number of concepts come out to really tackle in an evidence-informed approach to really tackle some of these NIH-wide problems that are of NIH-wide importance that no single institute might have the resources to or really should be tackling on its own. It should have NIH-wide partnership and leadership in moving it forward.
So what are the programs in the Common Fund that you've been engaged with?
Yeah, so we have at NIGMS, we have for the last, 9 years, managed what's called the Diversity Program Consortium. And what this is intended to do is really take an evidence-informed approach to both developing the future scientific workforce, developing faculty, and developing institutional capacity. And so there's a number of different components called Build, which focuses again on those 3 levels, a number of different, approaches at 10 different institutions, 10 different sites, thinking about what are different approaches that we could take to developing students, faculty, and institutions. And that can be the University of Alaska Fairbanks using a One Health model to try to integrate indigenous ways of knowledge into biomedical research training. It could be Morgan State trying to use an entrepreneurial model to better engage. The Build programs also focus on, developing faculty capacity to be mentors who have the skills, because again, mentoring is a skill set that individuals can learn to be able to be more effective for a wide variety of students and to develop the skills to more successfully compete for NIH competitive research support, as well as the institution. How does the institution develop the facilities and other capacity to sustain these efforts? There's also the National Research Mentoring Network, which has a number of different projects on the science of mentoring, as well as a number of different projects around how to best equip trainees with the skills that they need to be able to effectively navigate the workforce. And then there is the CEC, which is the Coordination and Evaluation Center, which really takes an approach to harmonizing these various projects under a shared set of hallmarks of success and evaluating the impact of these projects, broadly across the consortium. Because again, it's a consortium, not just you did this one thing, you did this one thing, but as we take these different approaches, how do we then move forward? And again, using a rigorous evidence-informed approach to say, well, what works for whom and where? And then how can we, importantly, because it's the Common Fund, then use that to inform the training programs across the NIH institutes and centers?
Really trying to affect, yeah, including NCI, right? Really trying to affect system change.
Exactly. Yeah, through these experiments, right? We always note that these, like every other Common Fund program, it's not going to, quote unquote, solve the problem, right? A 10-year program at a few different sites is not going to, shift everything that has happened for the last 40 or 400 years, depending on how you're counting. That said, it can and is being used to then inform how we evaluate our own programs going forward, and how the things we even ask applicants to further articulate as they're designing the programs that they have to train the next generation, expand opportunity, et cetera.
So I'm curious about your path. You're clearly working now in a variety of different venues, and I'm sure you've had experiences of your own that inform what you're doing today, but I'm curious about your own path. How did you first get interested in science?
Very interesting question. Yeah, and so, when I was a kid, I was really into meteorology. Some may say I still have my head in the clouds, but I was really interested in how the world works. I will set my story in a broader story. So I'm descended from enslaved Africans here in America. And so, my family lived through slavery. My grandparents grew up in the Jim Crow South. My grandfathers had 4th and 8th grade educations. My parents were able to go to college in the 70s through a program called Upward Bound, which was designed to help promising students from low-income backgrounds transition and succeed in higher education. And so public investment changed the trajectory of their lives, and by virtue of me being their child, changed the trajectory of my life, because then I showed up and my parents were like, you'll go to college. So I remember being 4 talking about going to college. Didn't know what it was, but I just knew I was going to go there. And I grew up in a Christian home, and so they're big on the idea of to whom much is given, much is required. And so it's like, you've gotten a lot, Kenny, like use what you have for service. And so those are sort of the big points that oriented my worldview. I also liked science, and I was quote unquote, was good at it. But if you're good at science, then you track toward being a medical doctor, because that's a way to help people. But I had a number of teachers, and I grew up in Durham, North Carolina. So I actually had Black science teachers in middle and high school, and they saw promise. And so they encouraged me to do some pre-college research programs. But because I grew up in Durham, my high school jobs were working in labs at Duke and UNC.
Nice.
And so one of the speakers said, if you're a medical doctor, you'll likely treat 10,000 patients in your lifetime. The person who discovered penicillin has treated billions on every continent for the last 6 decades. And I was like, whoa, I can use science to help people. I was 15, so I said, I will cure cancer. I have a more complicated view of how that works. But, I was like, we're going to go forth. And so, yeah, that set me on a trajectory. I was at the University of Maryland, Baltimore County, with enough support from both the university's Meyerhoff Scholarship Program, which is a national model for, again, enhancing broader participation in the biomedical research workforce, actually STEM broadly. Also had support from the MARC program that I mentioned earlier, NIH and NIGMS, and Howard Hughes. And then, I was on my way. So I did cancer immunology work as an undergrad, did my PhD in immunology at Stanford. And again, there I was looking at stem cells in the blood during normal blood development and during leukemia or blood cancer. So always been at this nexus. And I would just say, I've written about this kind of going from pipettes to policy. The further my training progressed, I felt farther from the reasons that I went into science, because my reasons were using science for public benefit. And by public, meaning all the public. But I wasn't seeing that before me and the models before me. And it's not a knock on anybody. It was just sort of, the value systems of the institutions that I saw weren't really about that. They were about, kind of building your own little fiefdom and making yourself the best known for a very focused area of science, which just, that wasn't exciting to me. And then I also saw my friends who had also gone through these training programs, and 3 of my friends who were very accomplished Black women scientists at institutions and had publications in the fancy one-word journals. A number of them were leaving science because they had such bad experiences in grad training. And one said, I'll stay in science, but I'll never do academia. And I thought, well, this is kind of a waste. This is a tragedy for them and a waste for all of us, because we can't benefit from their perspectives. And then I saw some of my other colleagues who were white guys also leaving. And I was like, well, what is happening? Why is anybody making the decisions that they're making? I said that just because so much of the effort has been on getting, especially if you talk about underrepresentation, get folks interested early and support them early, with the idea being that once you get the degree,
everything's good.
All the challenges that existed until then go away. And I am of the generation, like, these programs that come to maturity, and it's like, no, we have PhDs from, Stanford and all peer institutions and publishing in Science, Cell, Nature. No, like we can do it. You're not creating an environment where people with choices feel like they should choose that. So anyways, I came to DC as a AAAS Science Technology Policy Fellow. I said, maybe I can try to fix it. I figured I'd do a 1-year thing and then go back to my postdoc at Harvard. And I had it all, the very well-known stem cell lab with 30 postdocs. I might be one of the 3 to get the brass ring out. But I worked at the National Science Foundation, the director for education and human resources, now called STEM Education. And really there, I was able to work with a colleague, Kim Griffin, who's now the Dean of Education at the University of Maryland School of Education. Then she was an assistant professor. But I worked with her to really start to study, why do PhDs make the career decisions they make? And I tell people, I was like, this can sound esoteric, but we spend a lot of money trying to shape the career decisions of PhDs specifically to both generate, develop the people and then shape the choices they want to make. And I'd seen a lot of literature, K-12, some undergrad, some grad, and some when you become a faculty, but not in that, as I call it, PhD to JOB land, where we worked and we got a number of different papers published. And interestingly, the very first weekend when I was a AAAS fellow, I met Neil Freeman from the NCI intramural. And so his wife was a AAAS fellow with me. I met him at a picnic and he described the Cancer Prevention Fellowship Program to me. And so I just got in DC, but I said, well, if I ever do a postdoc, that's probably the one I would do because they're the only people who would probably take me given all my varied interests. And so, a year later in my AAAS fellowship, I needed to figure out what I wanted to do. I had met my now wife, then girlfriend. And I was like, okay, I think I should stay in the area. Just hit 10 years. Yay. So
congratulations.
Thank you. And so anyways, I applied for the Cancer Prevention Fellowship, which allowed me to move in this direction of, I called it policy science. So thinking about, because my PhD training trained me to think about things rigorously at a kind of individual level. That allowed me to think more population systems level. And then long story short, continued to publish on the work that I was doing and then applied for a position at NIGMS, National Institute of General Medical Sciences, where I am now, in the Data and Policy Office. Was there for a year, published some more, and then, moved in the direction of program officer, mainly because I thought I could have an impact on shaping how, understanding it better. I thought I wanted to now move towards shaping how the money is spent and what we think about that. I've had a great time there. I've been very fortunate. The director, John Lorish, the division director, Allison Gammy, and everybody else has been very supportive of me. And so program officer had different roles, and now I'm a branch chief, meaning I oversee a team of program officers and a team of programs.
Amazing breadth of experiences that you've had, I have to say. I'm jealous. You really followed your passion. I want to pick up one thread, though. So you mentioned that you observed peers and friends who were very accomplished, getting great papers, doing their graduate work at fantastic institutions, deciding to leave science because of the environment. And that seems to me is a direct line from there to what you've been working on. And you told us a little bit earlier, which is to develop programs that support diverse scientists when they come into research environments. It's not enough to attract their attention and recruit them. Then you have to really work hard to support them. Is that correct?
Correct. Yeah, totally. Right. This is basic human nature. And sometimes we live in America. We've had slavery, a civil war, Jim Crow, and we continue to have challenges making sure all of us, meaning like literally all of us, can fully participate in any sphere of life here and both contribute and benefit from the great aspects that come here. So it also happens in science in America, around the world too, but I'm just focusing here. And so, yeah, it's totally correct in thinking about, how we can actually move forward, which for me, because sometimes, especially when I was publishing more, but even now, and especially in 2020, after George Floyd was murdered, without exaggeration, I got like 25 speaking invitations to help institutions, scientific societies, like, how do we fix it? I was also home with my kids during COVID, and I was like, I do not have time to talk. I've written about this. But, what I wrote at the time, and I still think holds, is sort of listen to people, because there are variations on a theme, but some environments might be doing well on some aspects, but not other aspects, right? So listening means like understanding what's happening and listening to the people who are there about the challenges that they are dealing with, acknowledging what they are saying, which can come with discomfort, because my observation is that many scientists want to, but most of the people in the field want to do well. Most want to support all their trainees, and most don't want to be perpetuating any forms of individual and systemic bias. But acknowledging means that we sometimes make mistakes, right? Like, my good intentions are not the same as a good outcome. Well, this happens in every relationship context. And then after you listen and acknowledge, you have to act, right? Which is where we sometimes fall short, because I was like, hearing people and feeling sad it's not enough. You have to actually then use the resources that are available to create an environment that will then help our articulated values to become enacted values. And again, I don't say it as the person who has it all figured out or pointing my finger, because in every context I'm in, I'm like, oh, here are things I'm messing up. I didn't realize that. But I try to say, hey, let me act. And so I think that's what it is. But you have to have environments. And again, you can talk about racial, ethnic underrepresentation, which again, I think is one of the hardest problems we've had to deal with. Because usually people say, oh, we just need more, get more folks interested. And I say, okay, well, let's look at gender and science. And so if you see, women have been more than 50% of PhDs for 2 decades now. They're still about a third of the new investigators. So I was like, if you have a gap when you have more than half the population, maybe it's not numbers. Maybe it's how people are experiencing both science and science within the sociological context of the different systems that you have. So yes, I'll stop there. But you have to actually support people, the actual people that are there that you're looking at, and like listen to what they need, which also means not presuming what they need, but just actually asking.
Right. Actually, yeah.
Right. Because sometimes they're like, I know you need that. And I'm like, no, I don't. I'm good on this. I need you to do this thing. So
supporting them in the way they need to. I want to take a small pivot. We've talked about all different kinds of career stages, and you mentioned that your focus right now in your current role is a little bit earlier, but you've also had a passion for postdoc training, right? You led NIGMS's postdoc research associate training program. You served on the board of the National Postdoc Association. I feel that the postdoc phase of the biomedical career is in a particular moment, today in the summer of 2023 as we speak. I wonder what your take is. Where is postdoc training today?
Yes, I agree. We're having a moment. Yeah. Some of us are, is it like the postdoc apocalypse? And I'm not saying that to be cavalier. It's just like those are some of the headlines you read. And then sometimes I'll talk to investigators and say, I can't now find the 20 postdocs that I used to be able to find, which can cause the question, did you need 20 postdocs? But the market has changed. And I think science is a passion for many. It's also a vocation. And so when we think about sort of broader labor market changes, and these are things that I don't have an answer to, and this is just me as an observer, not as an official of the NIH, right? But you've seen students and postdocs striking across the country saying, we need better working conditions. And that's sort of a broader movement of people organizing in labor. So that's a moment that's happening. There are additional opportunities as it relates to moving directly from PhD to career, whereas a number of organizations would say, hey, you need to do a postdoc for a few years before you apply. Now a number, particularly in the private sector, are taking people right out of grad school, so that the alignment or misalignment between the number of postdocs and the number of the types of faculty positions that many of those postdocs want continues to be an issue. And I mean, this has been talked about. I graduated more than a decade ago. I was a postdoc a decade ago. And this is a conversation we were having then. And when I was doing my work at NSF, I looked at publications from the 90s and the 60s. There's one thing called the Invisible University, right? And so in some ways I say, hey, there's nothing new under the sun. And there's new attention, but there are new opportunities for people. And so I think it'll be interesting to see how this all shakes out. I know the NIH Central is doing a sort of study on what's happening with postdocs. And so they have a panel. So we look forward to hearing what NIH announces, how institutions move forward, and then how individuals are able to move forward. And I think at the same time that you're having all this structural issues, you still have issues of, we want postdocs from all backgrounds to be able to move forward, and especially those who have been from underrepresented groups to, if interested, have the pathways to move forward, right? And so you have oftentimes these cross currents where you have this sort of structural aspect. We're also continuing to focus on longstanding issues of, for example, underrepresentation in the workforce. So yeah, and I just say it's hard, right? Like we think about postdoc life course. I had my first kid when I was a postdoc. And so it does focus the mind a bit. It focuses the mind and the finances, especially in the DC area, where childcare is exceptionally expensive. And so, I have sympathy for people when they're trying to navigate, because you hit, life course, people in their late 20s to mid to late 30s, which is the bulk of people in postdoc. Like there's life, there's family formation, there's all these other things that are happening that pull on people. So yeah, if you're a postdoc listening, keep up the good work. We're cheering you on, and, always reach out if there are ways that we can be helpful in helping you navigate. And be even aware of what the options are to help you navigate, because sometimes people don't know, I can get this kind of supplement. I can get this sort of thing. So, yeah. That's
great advice. I mean, I think you put your finger on it when you said that being a scientist is a passion, it's a vocation, right? It's a calling in that sense. And I think it's probably not often enough talked about that is something incredibly valuable to society, as well as important to the individual. So we need to think of ways of focusing our attention on that and nurturing that in people.
Yeah, I want to say that, like, don't say because sometimes people say, oh, it's your passion. It's like, yeah, I got to eat. I got to like pay my bills. And so sometimes people are like, oh, but you get to do your passion. I was like, I understand it's difficult for people to pursue a passion if they don't feel that they have, kind of was in Maslow's hierarchy of needs, right? If you don't feel like you can meet your basic sort of financial and then by implication, relational needs, particularly if you're in some sort of relational context, whether it's, partner, a child, parent, a grandparent, a sibling, like people have all sorts of things going on in their lives, right? And so it's the passion, but it's a vocation, meaning like there's a job and people need to be able to have appropriate remuneration for what they're contributing.
Yeah, thank you for pointing that out. It certainly didn't mean that because it's a passion that you should do it for free.
No, I know you don't. But I've heard that.
People, that's...
It's like, oh, it's your passion. And it's like, no, folks got to eat, right?
Exactly. So in closing then, Dr. Gibbs, I wonder what advice you would give to someone who's listening who might be thinking about a career in biomedicine, might be early on. What's your advice given all that we've talked about?
Yeah, I'd say there are a lot of opportunities, right? And so if you're interested, think about what we're doing now. We've had a COVID vaccine in less than a year. We're CRISPRing all sorts of things, right? Like there are new treatments for cancers, new fundamental discoveries on any number of areas. I manage stem cell biology grants. So you're like, oh, look, this is very interesting how you can think about developmental plasticity. So what I say is that there are a lot of opportunities. There are challenges, but the thing is, there's challenges everywhere, right? And so one of my friends always say, the grass may be greener on the other side, but you still have to mow and water, right? And so like every field, whether it's, academia, industry, government has things that are wonderful about it and things that are challenging. And so my thing is, and I think it's really important to understand what the options are. And then, and I wrote about this with Kim Griffin about a decade ago, really think about your values, because there's a lot of literature that in the context where you can make a choice about your career, to the extent that you can align the work you're doing with your own values, like what's important to you, then you will very likely sort of find the career success and find longevity, right? And so if you say, this is what I really want to do, whether it's being able to do discovery that I can hopefully just direct, being able to work on the cutting edge of pharmaceuticals, being able to work with students, being able to pay my bills. Like I struggled. I don't want to struggle. I don't want my family to struggle, right? As long as you are clear on what your values are, then you can make choices that are informed and align with those values. And when I managed the intramural postdoc program, I know one of the scholars who said to me, like, I've never actually been asked to think about my values, right? I added a question on their individual development plans, like, what is important to you? Think about it. Does the career that you say you want to pursue allow you to pursue the things that are important to you? If not, you should at least be aware of that tension because it will come up, So I think this values piece is really important and it's often under discussed. There's a lot of opportunity, know your values, and then finally, network. It's really, really important because what helps you stay there, but who helps you get in the door. So I think that's good. I'll leave it there. About 10 years ago, I wrote something in Science Careers. I'll send it to you. Maybe you can link it in the show notes, called Planning a Career in Today's Landscape. And there had some tips that I think still are resonant. But yeah, networking is one. And then go for it. Actually, I'll stop there because my mother, Lori Gibbs, would always say, never self-eliminate. Make other people tell you no. And so, I just kind of go for it. A lot of people do say no, but enough people say yes. And so keep going for it. Rejection is part of life. The only people who don't experience it are the people who don't try anything. And so, yeah, just go for it.
Thank you so much, Dr. Gibbs. Thank you for sharing all these insights and this breadth of experience and knowledge. It's really valuable information. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
And Dr. Gibbs actually mentioned show notes. So we're going to put a lot of stuff that you've heard about, lots of touch points in this conversation into the show notes so you can check out the links there. Stick around. After the break, we're talking to two scientists about the NIH's Postbac program and how it can give you a chance to experience research and prepare you for your next steps towards a career in biomedicine. The NCI is the U.S. federal government's principal agency for cancer research and training and conducts a broad range of research in its intramural research program. If you're interested in gaining research experience and training at NCI, there's a great first step that you can take. Here with me to tell you about it is Chanel Case-Borden, the Associate Director of Training Programs in our Office of Training and Education.
Thanks, Oliver. We are talking about a webpage called Future Fellows, where you can submit your CV or resume if you are interested in a postdoctoral, doctoral, or post-baccalaureate fellowship here at the NCI. and that's at both the master level and the post-college level. We will put the link in the show notes, but you can find the webpage by searching for Future Fellows NCI. At the site, you can tell us about your research interests and also indicate a division or center that you would like to work in.
What happens once someone has submitted their material at the site, Chanel?
Once you are in the database, any research team leader at NCI can see your application for the next 6 months. If they have an open position that fits your indicated interest, they will contact you directly to arrange an interview. A question we commonly get is, when are positions available? And generally, most post-bac and postdoc positions are available on the rolling basis. However, the fall and the winter is generally a time where we see a lot of post-bac hiring, and that usually begins the following summer. Internally, we are always promoting the use of Future Fellows to our investigators and staff to fill their open positions. So if you're considering completing training at the NCI, I encourage you to submit your information.
Great, thanks, Chanel. So that's Future Fellows on the NCI's cancer.gov website. Check it out and submit your info today. You never know where it might lead. Welcome back. Now we're turning our attention to NIH's Postbac program. Formerly known as the Post-Baccalaureate Intramural or Cancer Research Training Award, it provides recent college graduates who are planning to apply to graduate or professional school, like medical, dental, pharmacy, nursing, or veterinary, an opportunity to spend 1 or 2 years performing full-time research at the NIH. Postbacs work side by side with some of the leading scientists in the world in an environment devoted exclusively to biomedical research, a great way to see if science is for them. I'm delighted to welcome 2 guests to the pod to talk about their experiences in the Postbac program. Dr. Petria Thompson is currently a resident in radiation oncology at the University of California, San Francisco. She obtained her MD and her PhD from Vanderbilt University and her BA from Emory University. She's an alum of NCI's Postbac program. Welcome.
Thank you so much for having me.
Also with us is Valeria Velez-Galliano, who is a current postbac in the Laboratory of Receptor Biology and Gene Expression in the NCI's Center for Cancer Research. She obtained her bachelor's degree from the University of Puerto Rico in Arecibo. Welcome.
Hi, thank you for having me.
Petria, let's start with you. I'm curious what first sparked your interest in science and medicine.
A long-winded story, but I entered undergrad thinking that I was going to go to divinity school, actually. And in that process, I was taking a psychology class. We were having long discussions around, behavior and what influences behavior. But there's also a segment where we were talking about receptors and serotonin and dopamine and how all those things worked. And I realized that the majority of the class is more focused on the chemistry and the biology behind behavior. And that kind of sparked an interest into, I wonder what this is all about. So after about a month or so into my undergraduate experience, I'd say probably by the second semester, I ended up reaching out to one of our chemistry professors and started working on a project not really related to behavior, but related to chemistry in general. And that kind of sparked what has been a long journey that will not end anytime soon into science. Yeah.
Interesting. Valeria, how about you?
Yeah, so during high school, I had the opportunity to volunteer at a veterinary clinic. And, it was mostly like cleaning and that kind of stuff. But this day, like a rescue puppy came in. And so they were like doing a bunch of tests and I was around and they were like, oh, come join us and come and see this. So they like took a blood sample to check the puppy's health. And they were like, oh, look through the microscope. And that was just so eye-opening that I was able to see like the red blood cells and everything. And then there was like this little weird, like darker spots. And they were like, oh, those are parasites. And I was like, what? This is just so cool that you can just right now just taking like the blood out of the puppy. And so that really sparked an interest and then led me to like do my undergraduate degree in microbiology too. So that was like really cool for me.
So now, Valeria, you're working at the NCI, you're doing cancer research. Why cancer?
Yes. So like starting my undergrad, cancer research wasn't really an interest for me. I was doing mostly research on bioremediation, like more environmental kind of stuff. But then like the diagnosis of a loved one like really sparked that interest. And so I started like doing more research about it and reading about it. And then having that day-to-day like experience with my loved one like really motivated me. And so I ended up shadowing an oncologist. And then I also had the opportunity to be an intern at Fred Hutch Cancer Research Center for a summer. And so that was an experience all by itself because firstly, it was after COVID. So it was like back in person experience and also a bunch of research that I hadn't had the opportunity to really experience, mostly again, being in person and doing stuff in the lab and then just a different campus. And it was just eye-opening and I really, really fell in love with it. And I was like, okay, I really want to try and do this, give it another shot. And I guess that's what also led me to do a postbac because again, because of COVID, we had a bunch of labs that were just online and it didn't give us like the space to actually do the research. So it was like just giving you data and you're like doing like simulations about it. And so I wanted more actual research time. And so that's why I thought like a post-bac program would be like the right fit for me. And yeah, that's really what led me to be here today.
Petria, you turned to cancer and you are combining now patient care with research in radiation oncology. What made you take that particular direction?
I am thinking back to two moments in particular. The first moment was in the weeks before I came to the NCI. One of the first oncologists that I shadowed was a breast surgical oncologist at Grady Memorial in Atlanta, Georgia. It was the first time I was in an OR. I spent a couple of days with her seeing different breast cancer patients and was just really moved by their stories, really moved at the place that she played and the role that she played in their lives at that moment in time. To be quite honest, when I started at the NCI, I actually didn't know what I wanted to do in terms of science, whether that be clinical, seeing patients or getting a PhD. And at the NCI at the time when I was there as a post-bac, there was a program where you can shadow the oncologist in the cancer center. And what was really cool about that program is I think this was around the time they were developing some kind of like tyrosine kinase inhibitor. I don't remember all the details. But as a post-bac, I would see the patients that were at the Cancer Institute with the physicians, and then also go to almost like a tumor board-like environment where they were discussing, current treatments that are in clinical trials that were developed at the National Cancer Institute. And I think if this was a light bulb moment in my life, I think that was one of them where it's like, oh, wow, there are people here who are working in a lab trying to develop new therapeutics, but also see patients. So really getting the gratification of being with people during their most vulnerable times, but also getting the gratification of really tinkering and thinking through problems and critically assessing, what are the needs at this bench model? What are the needs and being able to be at both sides of that fence? Those two moments definitely, started solidifying the idea or the process of pushing me towards becoming like a physician scientist.
Yeah, so you've both already touched on how the post-bac experience influenced your paths. I want to go a little deeper in that. So Petria, did you finish undergraduate and you were then not entirely sure what to do next, or you were focused? How did you even hear about the post-bac program?
I was in my senior year of undergrad. I think it was in the fall time. And at that time, I was working as an honors thesis student in Edward Morgan's lab. And he asked me, well, what are your plans after graduation? And I said, I really don't know. He said, well, you should look into, are there post-bac opportunities? You're free to stay here, but, look into what opportunities are available. So I kind of had honestly stumbled across this program on Google and submitted an application. It was a lot of serendipity there. But honestly, one of the best decisions that I made at that time, they fly you interview with multiple different PIs. I was just like overwhelmed in a good way with that experience. I ultimately interviewed with Dina Singer. And I remember during that interview, she's like, typically I want my post-bacs to be here for at least 2 years. And at first I was hesitant, even though I didn't know what the next step was in terms of higher training, hesitant for, saying I'm going to take 2 years, quote unquote, off from my life to work with her in her lab. But honestly, the best decision. She was very invested in making sure that I matured as a scientist, but also making sure that I had opportunities to explore different avenues while I was there. If it wasn't for that experience, I don't think I would have pursued a PhD or even the MD PhD combination. Her lab was really diverse. Some of my closest friends are post-bacs or postdocs from that lab that I still keep in touch with. Between the 3 post-bacs that were in the lab at that time, I think one is doing like public policy, another is an emergency medicine physician, and myself, and we still keep pretty close. And then Chanel Case, who's still working at the NIH, also a really close mentor. And so, it's both like the development of becoming a scientist, but you also develop these relationships that end up years later. I think we're like almost 10 years out, really impacting you in more ways than you could have even imagined.
Yeah, that's really interesting. And I should disclose that Chanel is part of my team in the Center for Cancer Training, a close colleague. And Dr. Singer, one of the deputy directors of NCI, is actually my boss. So, but that's fantastic. So, Valeria, you already kind of told us you were after the pandemic, whereas the pandemic was easing off, if you will. We're keen to get your hands back sort of in the game, so to speak, to practical science. So tell us, what is the postbac? What is your day like as a postbac?
Oh, my day like as a postbac. I guess I spend most of my day in the lab. I just plan out my experiments for the week, like my objectives, my goals for the week, what I want to like try to accomplish. So some days it's more data analysis. Some other days are actual heavy bench work. And I guess it alternates between that. Some days I do have meetings with other postbacs, and that's really fun. So I guess it depends really. So, but a lot of time in the lab.
But it's focused on research. You're not necessarily taking any courses or anything like that. It's really a break from the undergraduate life, right?
Yes, but you can also take classes, like the NIH offers a bunch of classes. So I took a class back in January, and that was very nice. It was like introductions to the hallmarks of cancer. So it was like a good refresher and like a good thing to relook at and also get back into like a study curriculum. It was very nice. And I think the professors were also super great and encouraging. They always gave like really good feedback. So that was like really fun.
Petra, when you were a postbac, did you take any classes?
I was just going to say, Valeria, thank you so much for reminding me of those classes. Yeah, as a postbac, I did take some classes, which was a good, bridge between being a student and not being a student. I took an immunology course as well as a biostats course, both really helpful. Probably don't have my notes for my biostats course, but the immunology course I used a lot in my day-to-day and also really formed a foundational understanding for immunology for me. So yeah, those courses were absolutely wonderful. Also, there were some other opportunities there. I don't know if Valeria has done any of these, but opportunities to like present your work to other postbacs. So kind of like a postbac seminar. There was like a career development office that helped with CV and resumes and personal statements. And I also did like a mock interview with them actually before going off for my medical school interview. So a lot of really good resources there for sure.
Yeah, thanks for mentioning that. I mean, a lot of the postbacs, I don't have the exact number, but it's many of them, as I said in the intro, are aspiring to go to professional schools, medical school, other kinds of schools, or graduate schools. So there are programs to help with that, right? You just mentioned it, interview preparation and things like that, CV preparation. Valeria, are there other professional development things that you've had a chance to engage with?
Yeah, they always have a bunch of seminars every week for the postbacs, and also like spaces for like, they have this thing called mindful meditation. So they're like groups to help you develop. And if you're like feeling stressed or anything, you can go and talk to them. So they also have those kind of spaces for the postbacs. But yeah, a lot of professional development seminars. And as she mentioned, like for mock interviews, CVs and everything, they do that. I haven't done it yet, but we'll take advantage of that because that's just part of it. But yeah, I know I have a bunch of friends that have done it and they just really like it.
So Valeria, what has been the major impact of being a postbac? I think you're coming towards the end of your first year. Is that correct?
Yes, that is correct. My postbac experience was supposed to be 1 year. In January, I made it official for 2 years since I kind of like really like it a lot and have seen like progress overall. And I think I really want to stay for another year. Also, give myself a little bit more chance to actually decide what I want to do afterwards.
What are your next steps? If you have any ideas, this is not a commitment. I won't hold you to it.
Yeah, so I feel like it depends. Sometimes I'm like, oh yeah, I want to do a PhD. And then other days I'm like, oh, I just want to do an MD. So I feel like I got like both sides of it, but I think mostly I'm reaching towards the MD. So we'll see how that goes, prepping for that. And obviously my time here is really helping a lot.
Petra, same question for you. You've already kind of indicated that at the NIH doing your postbac, you kind of got the spark for research and for medicine. Tell us more about that.
Being a physician scientist is a long road. Although the initial spark happened during my time at the NIH, I think there are a lot of transition points, both, during the medical school, graduate school training here in residency and then after residency. So I think I find myself oftentimes returning back to that initial childlike, really idealized version of the career before I started out. I think as you progress through this, you realize that mentorship and sponsorship is going to be really important. that relationships are really important. Understanding what questions are important and how to answer those questions is something that kind of started at the NCI at NIH, but continues even to this day. I'm in a bit of a transition period right now. I'm in my first year of residency as a radiation oncologist. I did an intern year before this, so not a lot of time at the bench during these 2 years. And so trying to figure out what that next bench is, who that next mentor is, what the next question is kind of a point in my life that I find myself right now. I think broadly still obviously interested in cancer. I'm training in a field where I tell my parents that I am learning head to toe cancer from, birth to grave. And so that really does afford an opportunity to really be exposed to a lot of clinical interesting scenarios and questions. And hopefully, will really push me forward as I continue on this journey. Yeah.
You mentioned, Peter, earlier, I think, as one of the learning experiences you had as a postbac was sitting in on tumor boards. What is a tumor board?
Yeah. So a tumor board is a multidisciplinary event that happens. I can give you an example. Right now, I'm on a prostate cancer rotation. So the physicians that come to that tumor board are pathologists that look at gross and microscopic anatomy for our patients, radiologists that review scans for our patients, and then the physicians that would be involved with either surgery, systemic therapy, or radiation therapy. So that would be your medical oncologist, your surgical oncologist, and your radiation oncologist. So cases or patients are presented with their clinical and pathology and imaging data. And then we, as a team, make decisions in terms of what is the next best step of care. And it could be a combination of all three of us, two of us, just depending on, the stage and circumstances of their tumor. Seeing that as a postbac student, I thought was a really cool opportunity. Not a lot of people get to sit in on those unless, they're already shadowing an oncologist and they're tagging along. But I think what's a little bit more unique with the NIH experience is that there were also scientists at those tumor boards as well. So they can speak to the data in terms of things that are up and coming or things that are currently in the lab that they will, like to try for these patients.
Valeria, you've indicated that you might be leaning towards medical school. Have you had a chance to sort of interact with any of the clinical activity on the NIH campus during your postbac?
Yes, I have. So here at the lab, they're part of a clinical trial. So I get to joining some meetings with clinical doctors, and then you also have the scientists. And it's very interesting to see their discussion about the patients and how you get both sides of like the actual medical doctors and then there's like scientists. And it's very interesting to see how they work things out.
My last question to you, Valeria, what advice would you give to people who are listening who might be thinking about participating in the postbac program? What's your advice?
To always ask questions. Just ask questions, have a conversation, and don't be afraid. I feel like that I have to apply that to myself a bunch of times because I feel like I get more, not scared, but just timid to ask. But yeah, just be upfront, like talk to people. Everyone is super, super nice and you're not going to regret it.
Peter, same question for you. If our listeners are interested in the postbac program, what's your advice?
I really like Valerie's comments on maintaining curiosity and not being afraid. I think I would add to that and say, it is an opportunity or a transition point to explore and not to be afraid of exploring. As I think about like the group of postbacs that I, went to the NCI with and various different things that they're doing, even if you leave the program not being a scientist, not being a physician, not being, a dentist, whatever it may have you, I think, understanding the process of science, being around people who are, leaders in the field is like a once in a lifetime opportunity. So use that time to, really explore and, decide, what your next steps are and utilize resources there to get to that next step.
Well, thank you both very much for sharing your experiences and your insights.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you so much.
If you're interested in the postbac program, check out the links in our show notes. On the NIH and NCI web pages linked there, you can see all the info on how to apply, including some recorded webinars with great advice. For NCI, consider entering your information into the Future Fellows website. Again, there'll be a link. Now it's time for a segment we call Your Turn, because it's a chance for our listeners to send in a recommendation that they would like to share. If you're listening, then you're invited to take your turn. Send us a tip for a book, a video, a podcast, or a talk that you found interesting, inspirational, or amusing. You can send these to us at ncicc@nih.gov. Record a voice memo and send it along. We may just play it in an upcoming episode. Now I'd like to invite our guests to take their turn. Let's start with you, Dr. Gibbs.
Thanks, Oliver. I think I'll recommend, and this is not endorsement of the service, but are all the new Star Trek iterations that are on Paramount Plus. And so we got it because when COVID was running through my house, I needed to allow my children some digital reprieve. And so some movies that they liked were only on Paramount Plus. But then I realized they had Picard, which is a second take on the Star Trek Next Generation series, which I loved as a kid. And so Picard season 3 is excellent. So if you have any positive feelings for Next Generation and 90s Star Trek, I highly recommend Picard, especially season 3. And I've gotten really, really into Star Trek Discovery. It's just a large level of complexity. Discovery is great. It's great as it relates to representation, but also it's really mind-bending as it relates to space-time, multiverses, all the good things. So Star Trek Picard season 3 and Star Trek Discovery. I just finished season 3 and I'll start season 4 soon.
That sounds like a lot of fun. I'm going to check those out myself.
Yeah.
Thank you.
All right. Thanks.
Petria.
I would recommend play in all its various forms, especially for adults. So for me, my play right now is ceramics. So making mugs, bowls, plates, plate bowls on a wheel. And it really gives me an opportunity to lose track of time, build a community outside of what I do, practice some patience, a little bit of resilience when things don't go right, but also something I don't have to take too seriously, but still enjoy. So play, whatever that means for you, is my recommendation.
Well, thank you. I think it's a great recommendation. Valeria.
I would recommend this podcast. It's called Ordinarily Extraordinary. So it's a podcast about women in STEM and their journey through their career path. And I think it's very interesting just to get motivation from other people and just see how their life has been and how it's different for everyone.
Thank you. So that presumably you can get anywhere you listen to podcasts, right?
Yes.
All right, we'll dig out a link and put it in the show notes. Well, thank you both for those recommendations. I'd like to make a recommendation as well. It's a book called Misconceiving Merit: Paradoxes of Excellence and Devotion in Academic Science and Engineering. It's by Mary Blair Loy and Aaron Check. Based on a study of STEM faculty that these two investigators did at a top research university, they address the paradox that these fields, the STEM fields, are meant to be a meritocracy, that women and some racial and sexual minorities remain underrepresented in them nevertheless, and often feel unwelcome and devalued. In my opinion, it convincingly shows that dominant cultural beliefs in STEM are responsible for this underrepresentation, and the authors provide some really good insights as to how this may be addressed. As always, we'll put a link in the notes. That's all we have time for on today's episode of Inside Cancer Careers. Thank you for joining us, and thank you to our guests. We want to hear from you. Your stories, your ideas, and your feedback are always welcome. And you're invited to take your turn to make a recommendation that we can share with our listeners. You can reach us at ncicc@nih.gov. Inside Cancer Careers is a collaboration between NCI's Office of Communications and Public Liaison and the Center for Cancer Training. It is produced by Angela Jones and Astrid Masfar. A special thanks to Lakshmi Grama and Sabrina Islam Rahman. Join us every first and third Thursday of the month when new episodes can be found wherever you listen. Subscribe so you won't miss an episode. I'm your host, Oliver Bogler from the National Cancer Institute, and I look forward to sharing your stories here on Inside Cancer Careers. If you have questions about cancer or comments about this podcast, email us at nci.info@nih.gov or call us at 800-422-6237. And please be sure to mention Inside Cancer Careers in your query. We are a production of the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services, National Institutes of Health, National Cancer Institute. Thanks for listening.